Shards of ice exploded beneath Owen McCall's boot as he sprinted across the frozen lake, each crack a thunderclap in the roaring wind. His breath gasped in choking white clouds, and every muscle screamed to turn back. But then he saw them, two tiny faces pressed against the ice's underside, eyes wide with terror. Without a second thought, Owen hurled himself forward, fists hammering the brittle surface until it shattered in a spray of frost. Water surged around his legs, stealing his breath as he plunged into the darkness. Fingers clawed at the ice, panic flared hotter than the storm's fury. And then he felt their small, numb hands in his grasp. If that moment sent your heart racing, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to follow every twist of this incredible true story. Owen McCall's world had grown small and white. Each morning he woke to a horizon blurred by endless snow, climbed out of his creaking farmhouse, and checked the traps along the tree line. His flannel shirt, patched at the elbows, was more decoration than function, and the wood stove's groan was a daily reminder that warmth was a precious commodity. Since his wife's passing 3 years earlier, every sunrise had been both gift and gauntlet. He rose for his 10-year-old son Leo, but he also rose into solitude. That morning began like the others. Owen shook the frost from his boots on the front stoop and stepped into the wind, each gust whispering through the broken window panes. The sky was a featureless gray, and the cavity of the lake beyond the barn lay untested, its ice still thin. He paused at the workbench to fill the old thermos with coffee strong enough to burn off the cold. Leo would be waiting for pancakes, or at least something warm, edible, and quick. Back inside, the kettle screeched as steam filled the narrow kitchen. Owen ladled batter onto a griddle, the sizzle echoing through the empty rooms. The farmhouse creaked under its own age, the boards shifting like bones in the throes of winter. It was the kind of place a man could grow roots in or be trapped by. Dad Leo's shout jolted Owen from his thoughts. The boy burst through the back door, snow spraying from his shoulders. His cheeks were pink hair, damp from the wind. In his small hand he held a scrap of paper white with frost, but unmistakably covered in tiny prints. Owen, look. Leo thrust the paper toward him. 2 sets of footprints, the shape of little boots, led straight to the lake, and then stopped. Owen's heart lurched. He set the pancake spatula. "It can't be," Leo whispered. "They stop right there." He pointed where the tracks vanished into smooth ice. Owen forced himself to breathe. "Show me," he said, voice low and steady, every fiber of his being snapping into focus. He grabbed his coat, shoved on mittens, and stepped into the storm, Leo close behind. They reached the barn, its doors yawning open to the wind. Beyond the frozen lake gleamed a mirror of lead. The footprints trailed out 2 sets side by side, 6-year-old prints unmistakably human, impossibly brave or foolish given the season. Owen's pulse pounded in his ears. Thin ice. No other tracks returning. 2 children stranded. "Owen, what if?" Leo's voice trembled. "Don't finish." Owen's jaw clenched. He scanned the tree line for any sign of small figures, any glimpse of someone stumbling or waving. Nothing. The wind whistled and snow-laden pines bowed as if offering a solemn hush. He took off running. The first step shattered the ice in a web of fractures. Frost sprayed his face. Panic fluttered in his chest, but he choked it down. He shouted, "Hello! Can anyone hear me?" His words were swallowed by the gale. Then came the faint cry, high and muffled, like a child's voice calling through a blanket. Owen dropped to his knees and pressed an ear to the ice snow clinging to his eyelashes. A sob. Another plead for help. He rose and slammed his elbow against the surface again and again. Each strike rent the ice in jagged lines until it gave way. Owen braced himself, then plunged through the crack. Freezing water engulfed him steel cold against his flesh, knocking breath from his lungs. He surfaced chest heaving and saw them, 2 little girls, hair plastered to their foreheads, eyes wide with terror. Their coats were thin gloves gone. They drifted where they'd fallen through. Without hesitation, Owen reached for one wrist, then the other, and with every ounce of strength pulled them to the shattered rim. Behind him, Leo hammered on the barn walls, frantic. "Dad! I called for help," he shouted, voice cracking. Owen raised his head and screamed, "2 girls! Lake need help!" Leo bolted for the emergency radio, his small form swallowed by the white. Owen dragged the twins onto solid ice and crawled back to shore muscles, trembling. He sat in the snow, cradling them, shivering until help arrived in the form of paramedics, their siren a distant lullaby. The children were alive, miraculous amid that frozen wasteland. Later in the hospital's emergency room, Owen wrapped them in blankets. Frostbite had taken its toll, but no brain injuries. Leo sat beside him, clutching his father's hand. "Are they going to be okay?" he asked, eyes wide. Owen glanced down the hallway where doctors moved silently. "They will be," he said softly. "They're safe now." Yet safe rang hollow. Who were these girls? Where was their mother? The twins whispered their names, Rosie and Willa, but no family arrived. Only the hushed hum of hospital machinery and the echo of boots on linoleum. That night, Owen couldn't sleep. He stared at the lake through frost-edged windows, haunted by how close the girls came to death. But he also felt something else, the spark of purpose in saving lives, the fragile bloom of hope in the depths of winter. And so began the season Owen McCall would never forget, a winter that demanded more than survival, one that demanded the courage of a father who ran headlong into the storm. Owen's heart hammered so loudly he was sure Leo could hear it through the storm. He yanked open the back door and was swallowed by the whiteout boots sliding across 6 inches of fresh snow. The wind tore at his collar, roaring like some ancient beast as he sprinted across the yard, Leo's shivering form trailing behind him. Each step crackled snow crushed beneath his soles, and the gravity of those tiny footprints pressed in his mind with every stride, 2 sets of boots side by side leading out onto the lake, and then nothing. He reached the barn and wrenched the door open, slamming back the icy gust that threatened to drag him inside out. Beneath the low rafters, Leo's flashlight beam trembled across empty stalls. Owen grabbed the boy's hand without thinking, yanking him outside. Leo lurched forward, startled, but let himself be hauled toward the lake's edge, anticipation and dread warring in his wide eyes. The pond lay just past the barn, a vast expanse of glassy ice that glittered dimly under the storm-gray sky. Snow still fell in thick, silent sheets, smoothing over every rough edge of the frozen surface. Around the perimeter, the pine trees hunched beneath their heavy burden branches, bowed in silent vigilance. Owen paused, breath catching in his throat as he scanned the ice. Then, like the hand of fate etched in white, he saw them 2 sets of child-sized footprints disappearing into the center of the lake with nothing to mark a way back. Leo's voice trembled. "Dad, they stop here." He pointed, arm quivering like a leaf in the wind. Owen sucked in a breath of ice-cold air, tasting fear on his tongue. He set his jaw and pulled a battered coat tighter around his shoulders, yanking the hood up with one hand while the other dug into his pocket for gloves. Leo fumbled to do the same, slipping his small hands into mittens that hardly reached past his wrists. "Stay close," Owen ordered, his voice clipped. He took Leo's hand again and led him onto the ice, each footfall sending a spiderweb of cracks across the surface. The ice groaned and trembled as if warning them away. Owen's pulse thundered. Adrenaline sharpened his senses to a painful point. The wind hissed in his ears, and the world contracted to the span of these 2 tiny prints. "Dad, it's not safe," Leo said, voice low and urgent. Owen didn't answer. He didn't dare. Instead, he pressed forward, lunging from one set of cracks to the next, mind focused on the print markers and the distance they covered. He estimated 40 feet to where the print stopped, a terrifying measure of thin ice and broken promises. Leo faltered, once panic flicking in his gaze, and Owen tightened his grip, dragging the boy forward. They reached the spot. Owen crouched to inspect the ice, leaning so close he could see his own reflection warping in the fractured surface. Beneath the top layer, too dark for comfort, he sensed the abyss waiting. He pressed a booted toe at the edge of the crack and felt it shift beneath his weight. Thin, far too thin. "Leo," he said, voice low, "I need you to stay here. Promise you won't follow me." Leo nodded, tears freezing on his cheeks. "Promise," he whispered, stamping his feet as though to melt the fear away. Owen gave him a tight, quick hug, an echo of the warmth he fought to preserve, and then took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He rose and shuffled a couple of steps back, heart drumming a frantic rhythm. He set his feet, deliberately widening his stance to distribute his weight, and then took one last look at the footprints. He could barely make out the jagged webbing where broken ice had fallen away. He shouted into the gale, "Help! I need help. His voice carried across the lake, swallowed in minutes by the howling wind. No answer. Owen clenched his fists. He couldn't wait. Every second counted. He took a running jump, vaulting over the fragile crack into deeper ice. It shuddered beneath him, moaning like a wounded animal, but held just. He lunged forward, hand extended toward the next set of prints, fearing every step might be his last. Then faint against the wind, a cry, raw and small, coming from beneath the ice. Owen halted, straining to pinpoint it. He dropped to his knees, pressing one ear to the glassy surface. A muffled sob, the pitch of a child's whimper. It jolted him into motion. He rose, knelt, then slammed his elbow into the frozen crust. Crack! A spiderweb of fractures snaked outward. He struck again. Crack! He brought his shoulder down. The ice sighed and surrendered. Water burst upward in a jagged spray, the air exploding in his face as the hole opened wide. Owen braced himself, limbs aching as cold water surged around his knees. He reached down, heart thudding so fiercely it threatened to blow clear through his chest. Beneath the surface, he saw them, two small figures pressed against the underside of the ice jackets, puffed like life rafts, eyes wide in terror. He thrust one hand through the opening, clawing at the slick underside. His fingers scraped icy glass until they found a slender wrist. He wrenched it free, adrenaline and fear fusing until all he knew was rescue. He hauled the first girl through the gap into his arms, water rushing back in to fill the void. He scrambled backward, sliding across the surface, and pressed both girls to his chest, one in each arm, toes skidding on the thinning barrier. Leo's shout crackled through the storm. Dad. Someone's coming. The emergency radio's static was audible even here. Owen didn't wait for rescue. He hoisted the girls higher, their small bodies limp with shock, and scrambled toward shore. With one final heave, he hauled them onto firmer ice, and then he collapsed in a tangle of limbs, face inches from snow. His lungs burned freezing agony racing through his veins, but he refused to let go. When paramedics arrived, lights flashing through the curtain of snow, Owen lay over the twins like a guardian. He whispered, "Don't let them get cold again," before darkness and pain stole his consciousness. Hours later, in the harsh glare of the emergency room, Owen pressed blankets around the shivering girls and sipped hot coffee. Leo sat beside him, face pale but bright with relief. "They're okay, Dad?" he asked, voice small. Owen watched the doors to the treatment rooms swing open. The twins. Rosie and Willa clutched each other's hands, coats too thin, cheeks streaked with frostbite, but alive. "They're going to be okay," Owen said softly, voice thick with emotion. The paramedic nodded, eyes grave. "Miracle, sir." Owen didn't believe in miracles. He believed in grit, in throwing yourself into the fight, no matter the cost. But staring at those little faces, he felt something shift in his chest, a seed of hope that maybe kindness could grow even in winter's cruelest hours. As he stepped outside into the fading storm, the twins wrapped in blankets and Leo by his side, Owen realized that those two sets of footprints had become the most important markers of his life. They led him into the blizzard, into the ice, and into a rescue that no one saw coming. And as he trudged back to the farmhouse, the wind at his back and the radio's promise of help still crackling, he knew that this winter demanded more than survival. It demanded a reckoning with courage, and Owen McCall was ready. Owen knelt at the edge of the cracked snow, rasping beneath his gloves, and pressed his ear once more to the ice. The muffled sob was unmistakable now, a small, desperate sound that no father could ignore. He drew in a ragged breath, the cold biting his lungs, and shot a glance back toward Leo, standing half-hidden behind the barn door, pale face pressed to the frame. There was no time for thought, only action. Owen placed one elbow on the brittle surface and slammed it down, metal shattering through ice like a gunshot. The glass-hard sheet bowed, then cracked in a web of fractures. He withdrew his arm and struck again twice as hard. Crack. The fractures spread. Again. Crack. A final blow split the ice and the surface ruptured with a roar that seemed to shake the world. Frost-streaked slabs fell away, opening a dark, yawning hole in the snow-white expanse. Without hesitation, Owen dropped forward into the gap arms, braced on the jagged edges of ice, as freezing water exploded around him. Muddy shards of ice scraped his arms and face, each cut ripping fire through his blood. He swallowed a breath of water, coughing, and fought the surge of panic that clawed at his chest. Cold clung like shackles clamping his muscles, but adrenaline flared to life, hot and insistent. He kicked downward, letting his legs slide past the broken rim until his torso was submerged. In that moment, the lake felt bottomless, the world reduced to a tunnel of inky water and flecks of suspended ice. Owen's vision blurred and he struggled to keep his bearings, but he forced himself to remain calm. Clear thought was his lifeline. He remembered the whisper of sobs. He craned his neck upward, using ripples of broken ice as a guide. There, through the fractured surface, he saw them, two little faces pressed against the chilled underside hair floating in the water. Their eyes were impossibly wide pupils matching his own terror. One tiny mouth gaped bubbles, breaking free with each tremor of fear. Owen reached out with his right hand, fingers splayed, and felt the cling of frost-slick plastic. His glove caught on the tip of a mitten. He tore it free and pressed on. He closed around a small wrist, fingers numb but firm, and lifted, pulling the first child toward the hole. A glob of water surged in, and he felt her weight shift in his arm, light but heavy with shock. The twin's small body floated free, and for a moment Owen held her under the surface as he sought her sister. The other sobs rose, a muffled duet in the swirling cold. He twisted his body, sending a shower of ice crystals through the air, and found the second wrist. Again, he gripped, lifting and sliding both children upward until their chins broke the surface, gasping breaths whipping across their faces. Owen kicked his legs, each thrust a battle against the weakening ice. Inch by inch, he inched toward the rim. His gloves and coat offered no warmth. Shivers racked his core. He channeled every ounce of will into each movement. Finally, numb fingers found purchase on the jagged edge. He hauled the first girl upward, haunches burning with effort. He clambered onto the broken shelf of ice and reached over the broken crust to haul the second child free. Snow and ice tumbled across the hole, and Owen rolled backward onto the snowbank, pressing the twins against his chest. His coat and gloves were soaked. His breath came in frosty embers. He held them tight, arms trembling, keys of his heart pounding so loud he feared they would burst free. Behind him, Leo burst across the ice, slipping, but Owen caught sight of the boy's tear-streaked face. "Dad!" Leo cried, stumbling into the broken ice field. "You got them!" Owen wrapped a gloved arm around Leo's shoulders, drawing him close. "Stay down," he gasped. "Don't come any closer." Leo nodded, confusion and relief warring in his eyes. He sank to his knees behind the last wall of solid ice, hands clasped over his mouth. Owen settled both girls on the snowbank, head bobbing as they coughed and sputtered. Their little bodies were stiff as dolls, clothing already frozen stiff. Owen peered past them, rehearsing fast shelter, then warm them, call help. He spat a mouthful of water and dragged himself upright. The cold was already draining his strength, but he forced himself to move. He reached into his coat for his radio, but the cord lay buried beneath snow. With free hand, he tore open his gloves and fumbled for the emergency transmitter. Static at first, then Leo's voice crackling through from the barn. "I called them, Dad." "They're on the way." Owen exhaled a shuddering breath. He scooped the girls into his arms, tucking their heads against his chest. He left the hole in the ice unsealed, trusting that no one else would venture this far. He turned and staggered back across the fractured surface, each step precarious. The twins clung to him, their tiny bodies trembling, but both were alive. As he reached firmer ground, the sky lightened with the first pale rays of dawn. Through the storm's haze, he spotted flashing lights, red and white, blinking like lifesavers on a dark sea. Paramedics charged across the snow, carrying blankets and medical kits. Owen knelt and gently laid the girls on a tarp spread on the snow, wrapping them in thermal blankets. He knelt beside them, hands cupping their tiny faces, whispering, "It's okay. You're safe now." The paramedic directed an assistant to lift Rosie onto a gurney and another to Willa. Owen stood back, sodden and drained, as they checked vitals and applied warming packs. Leo approached, gloved hands tucked into his coat. He dropped to a squat beside his father, eyes wide. "They're going to be okay?" Leo asked. Owen wrapped an arm around him. "Yes," he said, voice rough. "They're going to be okay." The twins' mothers, first responders, and neighbors began to converge where the barn met the lake. The world, once frozen and silent, throbbed with life and motion, voices calling, boots crunching, the drone of a warming engine. Owen stayed where he was, soaked to the bone, watching the swirl of bustle with a strange detachment. Rescue teams moved with efficiency. People asked questions and offered blankets. Radios squawked in urgent undertones. One of the paramedics approached Owen gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sir, you need to get warmed up too." She offered him a mylar blanket. He accepted with a curt nod, lowering his head to let her drape it around him. The metal clung like an ember in his hands. Leo reached up and touched his father's face. "You saved them," he whispered, voice thick. Owen met his son's gaze, eyes brimming with raw emotion. He squeezed Leo's shoulder. "We saved them," he said, looking down at the girls still asleep in thermal blankets. "We're the ones who saved them." And in that moment, the frozen lake behind them, with its silent footprints and deadly promise, became the backdrop for a father's leap, an act of instinct so pure that every crack in the ice seemed to echo with its courage. Dawn broke brighter, then, not with the triumph of sun over storm, but with a deeper warmth. The light of compassion poured into a winter's night, shattering fear as surely as Owen's elbow shattered ice. The world would remember this day not for its danger, but for the leap of a man who risked his life for two little girls he barely knew, and found in doing so that kindness could thaw even the coldest heart. Owen's world narrowed to a tunnel of icy water and panic. His lungs burned with each desperate intake of air, yet he forced himself deeper, driven by the sobs that echoed through the frozen darkness. Fingers numb and slick with ice, he groped along the underside of the shattered ice. Every stroke of his arm was a fight against the cold that sought to paralyze him. Yet he strode on, heart pounding like a war drum in the void. Then he felt it, the brush of nylon against the curve of his palm. A tiny wrist frail as a sparrow's wing. He latched on without hesitation, baring teeth against the ache in his bones. The first girl's face appeared through the murky water eyes, wide and glassy hair, floating like dark reeds. Owen clamped his other hand around her torso, squeezing gently to anchor her against the current. She was limp eyes, unblinking, shock, freezing her small body more surely than the lake's ice above. Owen hauled her upward, kicking in a frenzy until the tunnel of water spat him out through the opening. He slammed both hands against the brittle edge and hoisted her body onto the shattered ice. Her head lolled back, lashes heavy with frost. He dropped to one knee, scooped her into his arms, and pressed her to his chest, murmuring words of comfort he barely felt. "You're safe now. You're safe." A howl of wind answered him, whipping snow across the gash in the ice. Owen didn't pause. He turned back to the hole and plunged in again. Water crashed over his shoulders, frozen shards biting into his skin. He went under, swallowing water and panic, groping until he found the second girl. Her blue coat was twisted. Her gloves were gone. Owen gripped her beneath the shoulders and kicked for purchase, forcing his way through the suffocating cold. He surfaced with a gasp, water streaming from his face, and dragged the second child out. Her eyes met his with the purest terror he'd ever seen. She trembled so violently that her teeth chattered in a staccato shuffle. Owen laid her beside her sister, gently scooping her into the same set of arms. Both girls were now bundled against his chest, caught between unconsciousness and the shock of survival. Owen's world oscillated between two poles, the icy abyss he'd just left, and the bitter wind swirling above. He tried to stand, legs quivering beneath him, but gravity and exhaustion conspired to keep him prone. He coughed and spat water pouring from his mouth like black ink. But he could not let himself sink. He reached for the fractured surface and pulled free each inch of movement, a testament to will over winter. Behind him, Leo's frantic voice crackled through the thin ice. "Dad, I called them. Help's on the way." Relief cut through Owen's fog of pain, but he did not release the girls. He nestled them closer, their tiny bodies rigid with cold, and pressed them against his heart. He could feel their slow, ragged breathing of victory fought with ice and desperation. Footsteps crunched toward him. A flashlight beam pierced the gloom, followed by frantic paramedics who skidded to a halt, sliding across the ice in snow-packed boots. They knelt beside Owen, speaking in clipped tones, their hands efficient as they untangled the girls from his arms. Thermal blankets were unfurled, wrapping the twins like fragile sculptures. One paramedic pressed a warming pack against Rosie's chest. Another murmured, Stay with us, kiddo. You're going to be okay. Owen remained as still as the ice itself, wrapping his arms around emptiness as the girls were carried away. He scarcely noticed the paramedic's hand on his shoulder until warmth seeped through his soaked layers. He blinked at her soft eyes and nodded words trapped in his chest. Someone dropped a metal stretcher inches from his face. Leo appeared, boots squeaking, cheeks pink and wet. He reached out, trembling. Owen managed a hollow smile and touched his son's shoulder. Leo's eyes flicked to his father's shivering form, worry etching his small face. A strong hand lifted Owen to his feet. He surrendered to its legs, nearly giving out beneath him, and let the paramedic shepherd him across broken ice toward the barn. Every step was agony. His body protested with each movement, but adrenaline burned a path through his limbs. He had given everything for those girls. Now he owed himself their rescue as well. Inside the barn, Leo followed at Owen's side, his voice thin with relief. "Dad, they're going to be okay, right?" he asked, eyes wide. Owen pressed a hand to the boy's cheek. "They are," he rasped, voice like gravel. "They're safe now." Paramedics led them into the warmth of the barn's lee blanket, snapping at Owen's shoulders. Someone handed him a thick wool coat and boots dusted with straw. The breath of hay and the musk of animals seemed to thaw his frozen bones slightly, though the cold still gnawed at him. Owen sank onto a wooden bench, Leo at his feet, and stared at the empty door where his son, his girls, and his courage had intersected. The wind's roar softened to a distant howl. In the scattered lantern light, he caught sight of his reflection in the glass of a dusty window. Frost-crusted beard eyes, two bright hands trembling. He closed his eyes, willing himself to breathe. Each breath came in ragged gusts, but he drew in the barn's warmth, however fleeting, and held it like a blessing. Leo reached up and rested his head against his father's knee. Owen patted the boy's hair, more grateful for life's fragile threads than he'd ever been before. Outside sirens faded into the storm, but within the barn's sturdy walls, the storm had lost its grip. Owen McCall, single father and reluctant hero, sat with his son in the flickering light. The memory of two small lives reclaimed from a winter's death embraced burning in his chest like embers waiting to ignite hope in the coldest night. Snow whipped around them in a blizzard's last gasp as Owen crouched over the twins on the shore, arms locked around Rosie and Willa, pulsing warmth into their frozen bodies. Leo fumbled with the radio handset, breath rattling in his throat. "This is McCall Farm," he panted. "2, no 3 casualties. 1 adult, 2 children, hypothermia, and possible frostbite. Coordinates barn, frozen lake." His small hand trembled, but his voice was steady enough. Owen didn't move. The twins were limp in his grasp, their pale lips like winter petals. He pressed one cheek against Rosie's ear. "Can you hear me?" he whispered, tears mingling with frost. "Hold on. Help is coming." Willa's eyes fluttered open at his voice, confusion in their glassy depths. But then they closed again, exhaustion dragging her back toward darkness. Leo clicked off the radio and knelt by his father's side. "They're sending help, Dad." He reached out to touch Owen's shoulder, unsure whether to hug or stay clear of the frozen water seeping through their coats. Owen gave his son a weak nod, voice thick as melting ice. "Good work, buddy," he rasped. "Stay with me." They huddled together, 3 souls nearly lost to the night waiting. The storm seemed endless, but in the distance, Leo spotted flickers of red and blue weaving through the pines. Bright lights bobbed toward them, carving lines in the snow. The engines of the rescue trucks growled, louder engines roaring against the wind's wail. Owen shifted to gain a better view. His limbs ached as though his very bones had frozen solid. He brushed hair from Willa's forehead and tucked her closer, then cradled Rosie in the crook of his arm. Their tiny bodies were ice cold but still beating. He wanted to will their hearts to pound faster, but all he could do was whisper, "Just breathe, girls." Rescuers burst from the truck's circle of light. 2 paramedics in red parkas racing across the ice and snow. One slid on a set of crampons, flipping them onto boots before charging toward Owen. The other carried a large silver thermal blanket, the fabric stiff with urgency. The first paramedic knelt beside Owen. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, voice firm but kind gloved hands moving to free the girls. "We need to get them into dry layers." Owen's teeth chattered, but he nodded, eyes burning with relief and exhaustion. They're here," he gasped, voice raw. "They're here." They eased each child into the waiting blanket, tucking them like fragile dolls. Willa's head lolled forward, and the paramedic caught her chin, tilting it to open the airway. Rosie's small fists fluttered against the foil's rough edges, as if testing the barrier between cold and heat. Behind them, Leo perched on the barn steps, inhaling the sight of people who knew what to do. He watched the paramedics assess each girl, checking pulse-breathing skin tone. Nearby, a volunteer handed out hot packs and wrapped Owen in another thermal blanket, the silver glinting against his sodden coat. One paramedic snapped on a pulse oximeter to Rosie's finger, then Willa's. Numbers blinked on small screens. "Pulse strong, but we need to warm them slowly," she said. She adjusted an oxygen mask for each. Owen watched fists clenching and unclenching as relief and guilt warred within him. Guilt that he'd almost cost their lives, relief that they might yet survive. "Sir, we need to move them to the truck," the other medic said softly, offering an arm to Owen. He shook his head. "I'm going too," he said firmly. "I can't just—" His voice cracked and Leo rose to help, fitting his arm through Owen's. They carried Rosie first, then Willa toward the warmth of the rescue truck. Each step was a struggle for Owen. His legs quivered as if made of wet wood, but Leo's presence steadied him. When his turn came, he let the paramedic guide him inside the vehicle's rear cab, the doors sealing with a gentle hiss. Inside, heat blasted from vents, bringing tears to his eyes. Layers of blankets cover the twins' monitors and IV lines snaking across their small bodies. The paramedic offered Owen a seat beside Rosie. He sank down, reaching out to rest a hand on her silent pulse monitor. The soft beeps reassured him life persisted even here. Leo stood by the door. "Dad?" he asked, voice smaller now that frantic waiting had given way to cautious hope. Owen managed a tired smile. "Hang on, buddy," he whispered. "We'll get through this." The paramedics worked swiftly, checking vitals, warming blankets, administering IV fluids warm to body temperature. Owen felt warmth seep into his own frozen limbs as the heater fought the cold. A rescue coordinate crackled over the radio ambulance en route. Outside the truck cab, the rescuer turned to Leo. "Come on, son. Let's get you warmed up too." He led Leo to another vehicle, offering cocoa and dry clothes. Leo hesitated, clutching the edge of the truck door. Owen eyed his son's pale face and said, "Go. I'm okay. Help is here." Leo nodded, relief flooding his expression, and left with the rescuer. Owen watched the boy's retreating form, heart aching with gratitude and fear. He turned back to the twins. Rosie stirred, lifting her head slightly. Her eyelids flickered, then fluttered. She looked at him with eyes bright and alive. He smiled through tears. "Hey there," he whispered. "Welcome back." Willa opened her eyes, next blinking confusion in her gaze melting into recognition. She managed a small whimper and reached out a hand. Owen grasped it, his palm warm against the cold. "That's my girl," he said. Moments later, the ambulance arrived. Paramedics transferred the twins onto stretchers and secured Owen in the passenger seat, Leo climbing in behind him, clutching a warm blanket. The engine roared to life, tires crunching over ice and snow as they barreled toward the hospital. Inside the moving vehicle, heat coursed through Owen's veins. He sat between his son and the twins, eyes on Rosie and Willa, wrapped in blankets, heads pillowed gently. Leo reached over to hold his father's hand. "They're going to be okay," he repeated, more confident now. Owen squeezed Leo's hand. "Yes," he said, voice steady. "They are." His gaze shifted to the twins. "Thanks to you, buddy." Leo beamed pride, lighting his face. Outside the window, pines blurred by speed and falling snow, and Owen realized that tonight the frozen lake had tested him, and he had answered. The two girls at his side were safe, their lives reclaimed from darkness. And in that heated cab, surrounded by flashing lights and the hum of emergency equipment, Owen McCall felt a new warmth kindling in his chest, the knowledge that courage once kindled could thaw even the coldest winter night. The fluorescent lights of the emergency ward were harsh and unyielding, a stark contrast to the swirling snow and gloom Owen and Leo had just escaped. Owen sat on a hard plastic chair in the hallway, Leo curled on his lap under a borrowed blanket. The twin stretchers had already rattled by, disappearing behind double doors marked pediatric intensive care, swallowed quickly into a world of beeping monitors and hushed voices. Leo pressed his damp cheek to his father's chest. Are they okay now? He whispered, voice small. Owen stroked his son's hair, heart pounding from the storm of the lake to the quiet tension of the hospital. They're in good hands, he said, though even he couldn't fully believe it. The memory of their tiny bodies submerged beneath the ice still burned behind his eyes. Doctors are taking care of them. A nurse in a crisp white coat approached, clipboard in hand. She cleared her throat. Mr. McCall Owen rose and Leo slid to the floor, resting his head against Owen's leg. The girls' core temperatures are stable. No sign of organ failure, though we'll keep them under observation for any delayed effects of hypothermia. The frostbite on their fingers and toes is mild, just first degree. With proper warming and circulation therapy, they should make a full recovery. Owen exhaled the breath sounding like a rasp in the corridor. Thank you, he managed. Can I see them soon? The nurse glanced at Leo's dwindling form. You can visit for a few minutes. The pediatrician will talk to you shortly once he reviews their labs. She offered a comforting smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd seen too many crises to be surprised by this one. Owen nodded and followed her through the double doors. Leo stood by the nurse's hand, small and shivering, but brave enough to walk. They entered a hushed room where two little beds stood side by side, blankets and warming packs cocooning the twins. Machines beeped softly, and a thin tube drew blood from Rosie's arm, while Willa's small fingers twitched as if dreaming of warmth. Owen knelt beside Rosie, reaching a gloved hand to brush her hair from her forehead. Her eyelids fluttered, and the nurse murmured, "She's waking up." Rosie's eyes opened, dark and unfocused. She stared at Owen and Leo, confusion clouding her gaze. "Daddy," she whispered. Owen closed his eyes to keep the tears back. "Hey, sweet girl," he said, voice catching. "It's okay. You're safe now." He glanced at Leo, whose face was a mixture of relief and concern. Willa stirred next, blinking rapidly at the light. She saw her sister and then Owen and squeezed her eyes shut. "Mommy's crying," she sobbed, voice muffled in the hospital's hush. "Mommy's crying in the trees." Owen's heart lurched. "Mommy's crying in the trees." He echoed gently, blinking back fear. He exchanged a glance with the nurse, whose face had gone pale. "Excuse me," the nurse whispered to Owen, scooping up the clipboard. She conferred quickly with the pediatrician, a tall man in scrubs who approached with thoughtful eyes. "Mr. McCall," he said softly, voice respectful. "We'll keep the girls sedated for warmth tonight. They'll rest easier under a mild sedative. Tomorrow morning we can speak with them more clearly. For now, do you have any information about their family?" Owen swallowed. "No," he said quietly. They only whispered about their mother crying in the trees." His voice cracked. "I have no idea who they belong to." The doctor's jaw tightened. "Has anyone reported them missing?" Owen shook his head. His mind raced back through the hours, Leo discovering footprints, Owen smashing the ice, the paramedics' arrival. No call for missing children. No frantic parents. Just two tiny lives iced in solitude until he'd stumbled across them. The doctor's expression softened. "We'll contact Child Protective Services and the Sheriff's Department immediately. In the meantime, you can stay with them until the social workers arrive." He glanced at Leo. "Would you like to join your father here?" Leo hesitated, then nodded and scampered onto Owen's lap. Owen wrapped his arms around his son, drawing him close. Rosie's breathing grew steady, a quiet rhythm in the sterile air. Willa's chest rose and fell in tandem, as if twins shared not just bodies, but life's internal beat. The hours ticked by in whispered consultation between staff and Owen. He learned that neither girl carried identification. Their clothes were generic, no labels sewn into collars. Blood tests revealed no unusual traces, no illicit substances, no markers for chronic illness. It seemed they'd slipped through the cracks, no school assigned, no pediatrician on file, nobody to call and demand their return. Late into the night, after the girls were sedated and warm, Owen and Leo settled on plastic chairs in the corner, Leo's head resting on his father's shoulder. Owen's gaze drifted to the window, towering pines bowed under a fresh layer of snow, silent sentries in the night. He thought of Willa's whispered words, "Mommy's crying in the trees." The image stabbed at him. Someone somewhere crying so hard she abandoned her children on the ice. Leo stirred, blinking up at him. Dad, do you think they miss her? Owen swallowed the lump in his throat. I'm sure they do, he said softly. They're only 6. Losing your mommy even for a little while must be terrifying. He wrapped an arm around Leo, drawing him close. But they'll be okay. They'll have me and you until we figure out everything. Leo nodded, snuggling in. We'll keep them safe, right? Dad? Owen pressed a kiss to his son's hair. Right, he said firmly. We'll keep them safe. In the early hours, the social worker arrived, a kind woman with soft eyes and a gentle manner. She summoned Owen into the hall for questioning. Owen sat the social worker's questions clinical but compassionate. Do you have room in your home? Can you provide a stable environment? Will you cooperate with a full investigation? He answered each without hesitation. Yes, yes, absolutely. Because he'd seen their tiny bodies caught in the ice, heard their sobs muffled beneath the lake's surface. He'd risked his life for them. Now risk meant giving them his home, his heart, his all. When he returned, the social worker handed him a paper listing temporary guardianship emergency care plans and the promise that they would find the twins' mother or demonstrate that no fit guardian existed, in which case the girls might stay. Owen tucked the papers into his coat pocket and returned to the room. He found Leo asleep, head pillowed on Rosie's cot, one arm cast over Willa's blanket. The twins slept too, monitors beeping a lullaby. The sharp hospital smell was fading, replaced by quiet hope. He knelt and gathered the children in his arms, one by one. Rosie's hair fell in wisps over her forehead. Willa's eyelashes fluttered. He kissed each in turn. We'll figure this out, he whispered. His voice carried all the weight of his promised protection, shelter, love. The silent questions remained. Who was their mother? Why had she sent them out onto the ice alone? Why did no one search? But Owen set them aside for now. Tonight he would hold them close, wipe their tears, and give them the safety they'd lost. When dawn touched the ward's windows, Owen led Leo and the twins out into a quiet corridor. Nurses and doctors offered reassuring nods, their eyes filled with respect. The twins were safe. He, a single dad for them, as much as for his son, would see to that. Back in the snow-swept dark of the driveway, Owen paused before the burning taillights of the hospital van. He looked at Leo standing beside him, looked at the twin girls bundled in blankets, and made a silent vow, no matter the questions that clung to their past, he would answer their need for family, for love, for a place where they belonged. And in that vow, the silent questions found their answer not in mysteries solved tonight, but in a father's arms wide enough to hold 3 little lives, and a home open to the possibility of healing lost souls under one warm roof. Owen awoke to a wind that sounded like a freight train tearing through the pines. He rubbed his face and pushed off the borrowed hospital blanket, stepping out of the pickup with Leo yawning at his side. The small farmhouse stood dark before them, wreaths of snow clinging to the eaves lantern beside the door, glowing a weak, steady amber in the swirling white. Owen handed Leo a spare coat, then opened the front door and called softly, "Come on, buddy, let's get inside." They crossed the porch and ducked under the awning, the storm's fierce breath snatching at their coats. Leo shivered but held Owen's hand. Inside, the warm air felt like a promise. Owen closed the door behind them, the storm's howl muffled to a distant roar. He set Leo gently on the couch, handed him a blanket, and made for the kitchen to start coffee. Leo's head lolled back against the cushions as the twins slept in their borrowed cribs, small forms curled under thick quilts, breaths rhythmic and even. Owen spooned coffee grounds into the percolator, the familiar routine anchoring him. Steam curled from the mug as he carried it to the window and peered out at the white chaos beyond. That's when he spotted her, a lone figure moving at the edge of the tree line, coat-torn hair plastered to her face, silhouette wavering like a ghost. She stumbled between the trunks blanketed by snow, then collapsed to her knees. His heart seized. He set the mug down and raced for his boots, yanking them on in one motion and flinging the door open. "Leo, stay here, okay?" he called without looking back, voice thick with urgency. Leo blinked awake and nodded, clutching the blanket tighter. Owen plunged into the snow, feet disappearing to the ankles with each step. The woman was slumped where the farmhouse's dim light met the forest's edge, her body curled around something small pressed against her chest. Snow fell in thick sheets, and her coat sleeve was torn a crimson smear on white. He called out, "Hey, are you all right?" She lifted her face, eyes wild and rimmed with red. Relief wavered with terror across her features. She pressed her lips together before answering voice hoarse, "Please, my girls." Owen knelt beside her. "It's Owen McCall. Are you the twins' mother?" He glanced at the bundle in her arms, a small blanket hooded tight. She rocked back and forth, shivering, and cradled the bundle with trembling arms. "Yes, yes," she said, voice cracking. "Mara Lowell, please. My girls, are they—" She broke off tears, carving tracks through snow on her cheeks. Owen placed a hand on her shoulder. "They're safe inside," he said firmly. "Come on." She pressed her face into his coat, as if smelling an anchor. He helped her to her feet, careful of her ankle twisted beneath the snow. Together they trudged back the snow, hissing at their boots. Owen wrapped his arm around her shoulders, supporting her as they crossed the porch and ducked inside. Leo sat up, eyes wide. "Mommy," he breathed, rushing forward. The twins in their crib stirred at the noise. Mara blinked at the two children, then gathered them into her arms. She held Rosie to her heart lips, brushing the top of her head, then Willa pressing both close. The twins whimpered, reaching for her. Leo knelt beside them, offering a stuffed bear. Mara sank to the floor in a heap of snow-damp fabric, rocking with a sob. "I'm so sorry," she croaked. "I'm sorry." Her coat lay open, revealing cuts on her hands and legs, a smear of blood on the blanket she'd wrapped around herself and the girls. Owen knelt before her, unbuckling his own coat to drape over her shoulders. "Let's get you all warm," he said, voice steady. "Coffee's on. Blankets are coming." Leo dashed for extra quilts, stored on a bench by the hearth. Mara watched him, expression torn between gratitude and self-loathing. She leaned her forehead on Rosie's downy hair, tears falling onto the pink puff of Willa's cheek. The fire crackled as Owen set 3 mugs of hot cocoa on the coffee table. The sweet steam rose into the room's hush. Mara took one hand shaking as she clutched the mug to her chest. Leo climbed into her lap, wrapping his arms around her neck. The twins nestled against her side, silent but alert eyes flicking between mother and new surroundings. Owen watched from the doorway, heart tight. The storm raged beyond the windows, but inside the world felt fragile and sacred. Mara's sobs subsided into soft rattles. She glanced up at Owen. "Why did you—" "I didn't ask for this." He shook his head. "No one did. But when I find kids in danger, I don't ask permission." He crossed the room, kneeling beside her. He placed a gentle hand on her arm. "No judgment. Let's get you safe." Mara lifted her chin, eyes blazing with shame and relief. "I thought I was protecting them, taking them away. But I was too scared to think." She closed her eyes, shuddering. "My husband. He was dangerous. He threatened me, said he'd take the girls if I didn't do what he wanted. I ran. I thought I could hide them in the woods, keep them safe." Owen listened, gaze soft. "You were doing your best." He offered her a tissue. "You didn't know how bad the ice was," he added gently. She dabbed her eyes, wincing at the cold. "I didn't mean for this." She gestured to the children nestled against her. "I never wanted to put them in danger like that." Leo looked up, big eyes moist. "Mommy, we were so scared." His voice trembled and he reached for her. Mara gathered him and the twins into a renegade embrace. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked, then fell silent as the children clung to her. Owen knelt beside them. "You brought them here," he said quietly. "They needed help, and you got them help. That's what matters." She looked at him, gratitude and grief warring in her gaze. "I don't know where to go," she admitted. I can't go back. He'll find me if I do." Owen glanced at his worn coat, at Leo sleeping soundly against Mara's chest, then back at Mara's hollow eyes. "You don't have to decide that right now," he said. "You've got a roof, a warm bed, food, and people who care. We'll figure out the rest." Mara nodded, leaning heavily against him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not judging me." He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Family's complicated," he said. "Sometimes you have to do things you regret to protect those you love. He stood and moved to the hearth, coaxing flames higher with a poker. The fire's glow spilled across the room, casting golden light on worn pillows and a mismatched sofa. As the storm pounded the walls, Mara tucked the twins deeper into their quilt and sipped cocoa Leo curled in her lap. Owen brought in an extra blanket and draped it over them, then slid onto the couch beside Mara, careful not to crowd. He picked up a thrown slipper from Leo's foot and put it by the heater to dry, then settled back. Silence settled over the farmhouse, not empty but weighty with the night's revelations. Mara gazed at the fire eyes unfocused. Leo yawned and rubbed his eyes, warmed by the cocoa. Rosie and Willa's small snores soon joined the fire's crackle. Owen exhaled tension in his shoulders, easing. He glanced at Mara. "Get some rest," he said softly. "We'll talk in the morning." She nodded, exhaustion overtaking her resolve. He stood and retrieved another blanket from a chest, folding it neatly at the foot of the sofa. "If you need anything," he added, voice gentle, "just call." Mara looked at him. Gratitude and fear mingling behind tears. "Thank you," she said again. He raised a hand. "Get some sleep," he repeated. Then he slipped away, leaving Mara to the warmth and her children's breathing. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the McCall farmhouse held a fragile peace. A mother reunited with her daughters, a son shielded from fear, and a father determined to see them safe. In the icy heart of winter, a new chapter unfolded, one of mercy, forgiveness, and the hope that sometimes the fiercest storms lead to the greatest rescues. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread, a cozy sweetness that chased away the chill of the storm lingering at the windows. Mara stood by the counter, hair still damp and coat hanging by the door, as she cradled Rosie in one arm and Willa in the other. Tears tracked down her cheeks in slow rivulets, laughter bubbling up in uneasy bursts as she rocked them gently, whispering, "Oh, my babies, my babies." Her voice trembled with relief and disbelief. Leo padded forward in his bare feet, clutching two worn stuffed animals, a faded bear and a floppy rabbit. He knelt beside his mother, offering them with a shy smile. "Here," he said softly, "for Rosie and Willa." Mara wiped her eyes and accepted the bear, placing it in Rosie's small hand, then set the rabbit in Willa's lap. The twins reached for the toys, fingers still stiff, and hugged them close. Leo beamed as though he'd just given them the world. Mara looked at him, gratitude blazing in her eyes. "Thank you, Leo," she whispered, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. He shrugged, eyes serious, then scampered toward the stove where Owen was stirring the roasting pan's juices, humbling himself before stepping around to fetch 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Mama Leo said, offering a mug to his mother. "Here, it'll warm you right up." Mara accepted it, wrapping both hands around the ceramic, and blew across the surface. The twins pressed their small faces into the warmth of her abs, eyes fluttering with the first hints of safety. Owen leaned against the counter, watching them. His usually steady gaze softened at the sight of Mara exhausted, relieved raw, and the children clinging to her as though she were their lifeline. 4 people bound by tragedy and chance. He cleared his throat and dipped his spoon into the roasting juices, tasting the promise of a meal and a future. Mara took a careful sip of the cocoa warmth spreading through her chest. She glanced at Rosie, whose eyes were half-lidded with sleep, and Willa, who poked at the rabbit's ear. "They need rest," Mara said, voice hushed. "They've been through so much." She set the mug down with a gentle clink. "I'll get their blankets," Owen offered, disappearing down the hall. Within moments, he returned with 2 thick quilts, folding them around the twins one by one. Rosie's small frame melted into the warmth. Willa's soft sigh echoed relief. Mara stood and adjusted the quilt, smoothing the folds as though she could stitch reality back together with her hands. She looked at Owen, attempting a smile that trembled at the edges. "Thank you," she said, voice catching, "for everything." Owen nodded, expression unreadable but kind. "I couldn't just leave them out there." He paused, then gestured at his son. Leo helped too. He kept his head and called for rescue. Mara knelt and touched Leo's shoulder. "You were so brave," she murmured. He blushed and ducked his head, then peeked up at her with a smile. "I just did what you do for me," he said. Mara's breath caught. "You're a good boy, Leo McCall." She ruffled his hair, then rose and stood before the stove where a pan of gravy bubbled. "Let's get some dinner on the table." She moved with cautious strength, hands busy, mind busy, heart, weaving a fragile safety net around these children. In the dining nook, Owen placed a platter of golden chicken roasted potatoes and steaming green beans. The wooden table was sturdy and scarred rings of past meals etched into its surface. Leo helped Mara guide the twins to the table, Rosie and the high chair Willa in the booster. Leo slid into his own seat, and Owen sat beside him, always protective, always watchful. Mara ladled gravy onto the plates before dishing out chicken. The twins' hands reached for small forks, uncertain at first, then more confidently as hunger overtook them. Leo offered each twin a potato, guiding Rosie's fork, and cutting small bites for Willa. "Here you go," he said. The twins tasted the food, eyes widening in surprise at warmth and flavor. Mara watched them eat, expression a mix of joy and sorrow. "They've never had a warm meal before," she whispered to Owen. "Only cold slices and day-old pastries." Her voice shook, but she swallowed the lump in her throat. Owen shook his head gently. "Not anymore." He reached across and placed a hand on her arm. "They're ours tonight." Mara met his gaze, tears pricking again. I don't even know how to be a mother," she admitted. "I was so terrified She trailed off, shuddering. Leo looked between them, worry flickering in his eyes. "Mommy," he said softly, "you're doing great." His innocence cut through Mara's guilt like a blade forged in love. She blinked and pressed her lips together to hold back fresh tears. Rosie looked at Mara with solemn eyes, then whispered, "Mommy." Her small voice echoed around them. Mara leaned close, suspending the world with a single look. "I'm here, sweetie," she said, voice steady. Willa clutched the rabbit tighter and nodded, eyes shimmering with trust. The room settled into a hush, punctuated by the soft clink of silverware and the children's murmured night sounds of eating. Owen glanced at Leo, who was diligently feeding himself, expression solemn, as though bearing the weight of brotherly responsibility. Owen's chest tightened with pride. As they finished the meal, Mara rose and led the twins from the table. Leo helped by scooping mashed potatoes into his own mouth with exaggerated gusto, a small smile playing at his lips. Owen nodded his approval. In the living room, Mara tucked the twins into the same spot on the couch where Leo had napped days before. Blankets piled around them, stuffed animals arranged by their heads. She sat between them, smoothing their hair with gentle fingers, murmuring lullabies in soft, broken tones. Rosie yawned and nuzzled against her mother's jacket. Willa's eyes grew heavy as she clutched the rabbit to her chest. Leo settled onto a nearby armchair, clutching the bear, watching the scene with wide eyes. Finally, Mara looked up at him and nodded. He placed the bear on a side table and blew a kiss toward the twins. "Night-night," he whispered. Mara tucked the last blanket around them and rose, moving toward Owen. She reached out and took his hand, warm and strong. "Thank you," she said again, voice each word, a strand in the fragile tapestry they were weaving. Owen offered a small, weary smile. "They're part of our family now," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out." Mara nodded, eyes shining. Together. She glanced down the hallway where Leo waited, silhouette small in the lamplight. "We have to stay together." She leaned into Owen's side, resting her head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. He could feel her trembling, not from cold, but from the enormity of love and fear and redemption that unfolded here. In that humble farmhouse, 4 hearts, once broken, began beating in unison, bound by courage, compassion, and the promise of second chances. Outside, the storm loosened its grip, the wind's howl fading to a whisper. Inside, laughter and quiet tears mingled, weaving a new story. One where a single dad's bravery, a boy's dependable kindness, and a mother's fragile hope coalesced into a family forged in winter's most perilous hour. And in the glow of the hearth, they found something deeper than survival, the simple, profound miracle of belonging. Snow still clung to the eaves and the pines beyond the farmhouse when Owen heard the first rumble, deep, mechanical, impossible, in a place where the wind usually reigned supreme. He glanced out the kitchen window just in time to see a convoy of 10 black SUVs carving tire tracks through the fresh snow, inching down his driveway like a dark parade. Their polished hoods gleamed in the weak winter sun-tinted windows, hiding faces he knew nothing about. Mara stood beside him, drying dishes at the sink, Rosie and Willa crept after her, clinging to the skirts of her mother's wool coat like two little shadows. Leo perched on the counterlegs, swinging eyes wide. Owen put a firm hand on Mara's arm. "They're from the Lowell family office," he murmured, voice flat as ice. "They want you back in the city." Mara swallowed palms, turning white around the dish towel. I'm not going anywhere with them," she said, voice trembling. "Not after what they did." Owen nodded. "We keep them safe here." He stepped outside before Mara could protest, Leo trailing behind him. The SUVs ground to a halt in synchronized precision engines, idling like beasts in a barn. Doors popped open and heavy-coated men stepped onto the snow breath pluming in the cold air. They advanced toward the porch in perfect formation, black gloves and earpieces confirming their purpose. Corporate emissaries, not law enforcement, here to seize an asset rather than serve justice. At their lead stood a man in a long charcoal overcoat, silver hair, slicked back cufflinks glinting. He removed his gloves and approached Owen with the cool poise of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Mr. McCall," he said, voice smooth and controlled. "I'm Grant Sutherland, representing the Lowell family office. Mrs. Lowell's board of directors has authorized our team to retrieve her and her children immediately." Owen squared his shoulders, Leo clutching his other hand. "This is my home," Owen replied, voice calm but unyielding. "Mara's children are safe here. I won't let you take them." Sutherland's lips curved into a practiced smile. "We're not here to negotiate hospitality, Mr. McCall. Mrs. Lowell holds a significant position in our family's enterprise. Her presence is required to finalize several critical matters. As her legal custodians, we have the authority to ensure she fulfills her obligations." Mara stepped onto the porch beside Owen, coat flapping in the cold breeze. The twins clung to her legs. Her face was pale, but resolute. "They don't belong to your boardroom," she said, voice wavering but strong. "They belong to me, and to my home." She swept a protective arm around Rosie and Willa. "We're not going anywhere." Sutherland raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Lowell, you're making this personal. Please understand this is about protecting assets, reputations. Not when those assets are human lives." Owen cut in, tone edged with steel. "You threaten her with custody suits, but this place, this farmhouse, offered her sanctuary when your board would not. She's not your asset. She's a mother, and these are her children." Sutherland's eyes flicked to the twins, then back to Owen. The wind caught his coattail, and for a heartbeat the tableau felt absurd. 10 luxury vehicles arrayed against a weathered farmhouse, the fate of 6 lives balanced on a man's refusal to yield. The children gazed up, silent questions in their eyes. Would they lose their mother again? Would corporate lawyers rip this newfound family apart? Mara took a shaky breath. "If you want to see the girls, look at them," she said, voice gathering strength. "They need stability, not more contracts. If you want me to negotiate with me, don't drag your SUVs down a country lane to intimidate a mother into submission." Sutherland regarded her for a long moment. Then he reached inside his coat and produced a thick envelope sealing fate in crisp white paper. He held it out. "Here are the revised custody terms. Sign it and we'll leave. Refuse and next time will involve law enforcement. Choose loyalty to your family or the consequences." Owen glanced at Mara, who closed her eyes to steady herself. He put a hand on her back and nodded. Mara drew in a breath and stepped forward. She looked at the envelope, then at the twins, who watched her with trusting eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she tore open the seal. Owen stood by, ready to intervene, Leo clinging to his leg. Mara withdrew the paper, glancing over the fine print by lamplight. She saw clauses removing her from any decision-making guardianship handed to the board, rights revoked. She let the pages slip from her fingers into the snow. The wind carried them away in a flurry of white. Sutherland's lips thinned. "I refuse," Mara said, voice low but unwavering. "You can't have them." She stepped back behind Owen and Leo, shielding her children. A tense silence stretched like a drawn bowstring. Then Sutherland closed his coat and tucked the papers away. His face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes were cold. "Very well," he said. "We'll pursue legal channels." He signaled, and the rows of SUVs thrummed to life. Owen moved forward. "Best you start with the highway patrol. They'll see the impossibility of this." His tone left no doubt any enforcement attempt meant a standoff. Leo tugged at his father's sleeve. Owen swept a hand around eyes on his home. They'll find we have witnesses' cameras and a community that won't stand for intimidation. Sutherland paused, appraising them the makeshift family bound by hardship, the boy's fierce loyalty, the mother's fierce love. He nodded once curtly. We'll be in touch. The convoy reversed, leaving deep ruts in the snow. Engines died in unison and the hush fell heavier than before. Mara exhaled, collapsing against Owen. Leo slid between them, wrapping his arms around both. Rosie and Willa peered from behind their mother's coat, eyes wide. Owen retrieved the pages from the snow, crumpling them in his glove. Let's get inside, he said softly. We have a family to keep warm. Inside the kitchen, Mara stoked the fire as Owen hung wet coats to dry. Leo lined up the twin stuffed animals on the windowsill, arranging them as cautious sentinels. The wind moaned beyond the walls, but within there was laughter, quiet, grateful, and the sound of plates set on the table. Mara poured hot cider into mugs, offering one to Owen, one to Leo. She watched Leo cradle his bear, and the twins sip eagerly. Her gaze softened. This is home, she said, raising her mug in a quiet toast. We're safe here. Owen clinked his mug against hers. Here we answer only to each other, he replied, voice warm. Not to corporate coldness. Mara smiled, tears glinting. Leo piped up his voice, bright family first. And in that humble farmhouse kitchen, 4 souls once broken, once alone knit themselves into a family, stronger than any boardroom decree, bound by love, courage, and the unshakable truth that home is where the heart refuses to yield. Mara stood in the blue pre-dawn light, her breath steaming as she gazed at the old barn. Its timbers were weathered and gray, the roof sagging in the center, but to her it was full of promise. She wrapped her arms around herself, remembering the night they'd found refuge here, and how Owen had handed her a cup of hot cocoa without a question. Now, with the twins and Leo sleeping safely inside the farmhouse, she was ready to repay that kindness tenfold. That morning, Mara made her way to the kitchen, where Owen was already stirring coffee. The twins sat at the table, sketching plans in crayon, while Leo organized a row of toy fire trucks, as if marshalling a brigade. Mara took a steadying breath. I've been thinking, she said quietly, pouring herself a mug. The warmth spread through her hands. I don't want to just stay here. I want to build something that helps families who've been through what ours has. Owen raised an eyebrow, curiosity brightening his features. Go on. I have access to funds from my mother's foundation, Mara explained, voice firm. They're earmarked for family support programs. I want to use them to turn that old barn into a crisis sanctuary, a place where parents and kids can find shelter, counseling, a hot meal, a bed, a haven. Owen studied her over the rim of his mug. His gaze traveled past the farmhouse to the barn's silhouette against the pale sky. You're serious? As a heart attack, she replied, and the edges of her lips curved into the first genuine smile he'd seen in weeks. Word spread fast. By the next afternoon, neighbors arrived bearing 2x4s, plywood sheets, and galvanized nails. Volunteers in flannel shirts and insulated work pants formed a welcoming committee. The retired schoolteacher who'd taught Owen years ago, the single mother who ran the community garden, a high school carpentry teacher with a truck full of tools. Leo watched in wide-eyed wonder as they offloaded ladders, wheelbarrows, and stacks of timber. Rosie and Willa appeared from the farmhouse doorway, clutching the crayons they'd used to sketch playrooms and quiet corners. Mara and Owen stood on the barn's cracked threshold, surveying the scene. We'll need a structural plan, Owen said, rubbing his chin. Roof beams, foundation checks. I've arranged for an architect, Mara interrupted, pulling a set of blueprints from her coat pocket. The plans were annotated in her neat script: intake office, counseling rooms, children's corner, family kitchen. She handed them to Owen, whose rough hands delicately smoothed the drawings. I want a place that feels safe, not institutional. Warm wood, natural light, spaces for art and play. Owen nodded. Vision expanding beyond the battered barn. We can add skylights on the south side. It'll flood the center with daylight and raise the floor joists to keep moisture out. Together they called out instructions. Volunteers measured walls and marked studs. Children ran between stacks of lumber, exclaiming over how the old barn was becoming a giant fort. Dan, the retired schoolteacher, hammered notice boards on the exterior wall for community announcements and job postings. The high school carpentry class arrived next, led by Ms. This. Perez their tools clinking in a practiced chorus as they cut beams for the interior framing. Over the following days, the barn shed its decay. The roof was stripped down to rafters and rebuilt with sturdy beams. Volunteers handed Mara cups of steaming coffee and sandwiches wrapped in foil. Leo perched on a ladder's lowest rung, surveying the progress with pride, while Rosie and Willa painted colorful flowers on a salvaged plank, destined to become a welcome sign. Inside, Mara surveyed the newly insulated walls. She ran a hand over the wood finger tracing pencil marks that would become doors and windows. "I want a big communal room," she said to Owen, her eyes shining. "A place where families can gather, share meals, and feel less alone." Owen grinned. "You got it. We'll build a long table right down the center." As the frame took shape, Mara met with the local counselor who planned to offer free sessions once the space was enclosed. The community garden group pledged to supply fresh produce for the kitchen. The school agreed to hold after-school art classes in the children's corner. Every promise felt woven into the barn's very bones, each handshake a plank in the foundation of this new haven. One evening, after the workers had gone home, and the barn lay silent under the pink glow of sunset, Mara and Owen stood side by side. The walls were up, the roof was sealed. Inside, empty rooms echoed potential. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint. Leo slipped his hand into Mara's. Rosie and Willa sat perched on a stack of wood, their legs swinging as they kicked imaginary soccer balls. Mara closed her eyes, letting the moment fill her. "Look what we've done," she whispered. "Real people came to help. They believe in this place." Owen put an arm around her shoulders. "They believe in you," he said softly. "And now I do too." Leo tugged on her skirt. "Mom, can we paint the walls tomorrow?" She bent to his level, brushing a kiss on his forehead. "Yes," she said. "Tomorrow we'll make it bright for children." The next morning, the barn crackled with life once again. Volunteers arrived with buckets of paint in cheerful yellows, calming blues, and healing greens. Mara laid out a color chart on a folding table, and Leo held up each swatch to the twins, who pointed emphatically at the pastel pink. "Pink for happiness," Willa declared. Mara laughed. "Pink it is." She handed a brush to Rosie, whose small strokes edged along the trim. Volunteers joined in transforming the interior into a kaleidoscope of welcoming hues. Inside the soon-to-be counseling rooms, designs of sun rays and flowers took shape. Outside, the children's wooden playhouse was stained a bright teal that glowed against the snow. By afternoon, the barn gleamed from corner to corner. The long communal table sat in the middle, flanked by rows of chairs donated by the church. A makeshift kitchenette sprung up in one corner, complete with counter space and a donated stove. In another corner, a cushioned reading nook beckoned with beanbags and shelves of books the local library had gifted. As Mara and Owen watched, the day's last light filtered through a translucent skylight, bathing the room in soft gold. Sweat and paint smudged their cheeks, but their smiles shone. Volunteers stood in clusters admiring their work, swapping stories about who would use the space first: a battered single mother, a family escaping domestic violence, a teenager seeking a quiet study spot. Mara turned to Owen. "I can't believe this is real," she said, voice thick with emotion. He nodded. "It is, and it's just the beginning." He lifted his hand and drew a long sweep across the painted wall as though marking their accomplishment. "Welcome to the haven." Outside, snowflakes drifted gently as if blessing the new sanctuary. Inside, 4 hearts, Mara's, Owen's, Leo's, and the twins, beat in unison, echoing the barn's transformation. From frostbitten hardship, they had built a place of healing, a haven born of inheritance and hope, sweat, and solidarity. And in that humble barn, a new family and many more would find refuge and the courage to begin again. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the barn-turned sanctuary. Lanterns hung from sturdy beams, their soft amber glow mixing with the flicker of flame to paint every face in warm light. Outside, the snow lay heavy and silent, covering the world in white. But inside, laughter and whispered gratitude filled the air. Mara knelt at the hearth's edge, pulling from her pack a pair of leather work gloves, their palms worn smooth with use. "I wasn't sure this would fit," she said, holding them awkwardly by the fingertips. "I found these in my mother's old toolbox." She wore them when she taught in the refugee camp. I want you to have them." She held the gloves out to Owen, who rose from his chair and took them, gently running calloused fingers across the supple leather. "These are amazing," he said quietly, nearly in awe. He turned them over, examining each seam. "With these, I can build 1,000 things." He slipped his hands into the gloves as the twins Rosie and Willa peered from behind his legs, wide-eyed and curious. Leo perched on a sawbuck bench beside the tree, clapped once, the sound echoing in the rafters. Owen crouched to meet the twins' gaze. "Look," he said, grinning. "Mama's gloves are magic. They help keep our sanctuary standing." Willa giggled and reached for the glove on his right hand, squeezing it like she might a teddy bear. Rosie, still clutching her rabbit, sniffled, as though moved by the moment. Behind them, Leo unwrapped his gift with deliberate care. He offered Owen a small brass harmonica, its surface etched with faint initials JM. Owen's breath caught. He recognized the gift in an instant. It was his father's harmonica that he hadn't thought of in years. "My grandmother found it in a box of things you left behind," Leo said, voice soft. "She thought you might like to play it again." Owen lifted the harmonica, brushing soot from its surface. This was Dad's," he whispered, turning it in his hands as though seeing a lost friend. He raised it to his lips and blew a single trembling note that hung in the barn like a prayer. It was wobbly at first, then steadied into a plaintive melody that wrapped everyone in its gentle ache. Mara's eyes glistened with tears. "That was beautiful," she said. Rosie and Willa clapped in delight, twins in perfect unison, their tiny hands making the only applause that mattered. Leo beamed, pleased that his gift had touched his father so deeply. Next came the twins offering 2 hand-painted snow globes, their glass spheres filled with tremors of faux snow swirling around miniature scenes inside. One held a model of the sanctuary barn with a tiny family painted on its porch. The other captured the frozen lake under a pale moon, 2 little girls' footprints etched in the surface. "We made these," Rosie said, voice high with pride. "So you'll always remember where we found home." Mara scooped up Rosie, holding her close, while Willa wrapped herself around Leo. "They're perfect," Mara said, kneeling in front of them. She turned the globes in slow circles so the snow drifted through each scene. "I'll place these in my room, and I'll show them every morning when I wake up." She kissed both girls on their foreheads, then hugged Leo tight. Owen watched, chest swelling with a quiet joy that felt more precious than any grand gesture. He stood and pulled Mara into his arms, the work gloves still snug on his hands. She rested her head against his chest as he whispered, "I didn't expect this. Family. But I can't imagine it any other way." Mara lifted her head and met his gaze. "Neither can I." She wiped a tear from his cheek, trailing it with her finger. "If we had 10 SUVs now, it wouldn't mean a thing." She tilted her head toward the barn's entrance where the soft snow continued to fall. "None of that matters." Leo hopped off the bench and joined them, arms looping around both parents. Rosie and Willa scampered up onto their laps, stacking themselves 2 at a time so they could peer at the fire. "It matters to me," Leo said, voice small but sure. "Not the SUVs, but this." He swept a hand across the circle of warmth, the worn wooden floorboards, the glowing lanterns, the family they'd built. Owen smiled and tousled Leo's hair. "You're right, bud. This is what matters." He reached for his harmonica and played a soft reprise of the melody he'd first summoned. Mara hummed along a low note that harmonized with the instrument's wail. The twins sighed with contentment and Leo beamed. As the last light of dusk faded, they settled onto a circle of patched quilts in front of the fire. The barn's rafters rose overhead solid and strong, a testament to all they'd wrought together. Sparks drifted upward like tiny fireflies caught in the chimney's draft, and the glow of faith and favor warmed every heart. Mara glanced around at the cozy tableau, her daughters snuggled in her arms, Leo tucked into his father's side, and Owen cradling his father's harmonica like a bridge between past and present. "We should open dinner," she suggested, voice gentle but eager. Owen rose and retrieved a kettle from the hearth, pouring hot water into mugs for tea. Leo bounded to fetch plates from the nearby shelving, homemade bread, roasted potatoes, steaming stew they'd prepared earlier. The meal was simple but hearty, the kind that fills you from the inside out. They ate quietly, the kind of hush born of gratitude and presence, each bite tasting sweeter in the company of chosen family. No one spoke of the corporate convoy that had rattled their peace days before, or the boardroom battles Mara had left behind. Tonight was about the here and now, the warmth of a fire, the glow of new beginnings, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gift you receive is the family who stands by you in the storm. When the meal concluded, Owen lifted his harmonica for one final tune, a gentle lullaby that carried hints of home and hope. Mara sang softly, voice quivering like the snow outside the window panes. The twins closed their eyes, drifting toward sleep. Leo's head nodded against his mother's shoulder. In the peaceful aftermath, Owen set aside the harmonica and passed Mara her gloves. "For tomorrow," he said, "when we keep building." She slipped them on, wearing them as she had intended, not to work the land but to help shape their future. They extinguished the lamps and let the fire die down to embers. In the gathering darkness, they each found a spot on the quilts, huddling close for warmth. The barn was silent, save for the creak of settling wood and the soft breathing of children at rest. As they drifted to sleep, Mara clutched the snow globe of the sanctuary to her chest, tracing its painted walls and footprints. Owen's last thought before warmth and peace carried him under was that even in a world of corporate coldness and winter's bite, the fragile bonds they'd forged in frost would hold them through any storm. The frost that once scarred the lake's surface had melted into memory by early spring. Owen McCall stepped onto the gravel path leading to the barn-turned sanctuary, now proudly named the Haven, and paused to take it all in. Tulips braved the still cool earth along the walkway, tulip petals unfurling like quiet smiles in the dawn light. Behind him, the old farmhouse wore its new paint gentle sage green, while the little wooden porch light glowed softly, powered by solar panels installed months ago. Beside it stood the promise post, a tall pine stake festooned with waterproof prayers and vows. "I promise to listen even when words fail me. I promise laughter. Even through tears, I promise to keep this light on." Mara Lowell, bundled in a lightweight jacket, joined him on the steps. In her arms, twin blankets swaddled Rosie and Willa, 6-year-olds, no longer trembling in the cold, but singing snippets of show tunes under their breath. Leo McCall bounded ahead, trailing his favorite fire truck toy as he surveyed the half-finished playground equipment, a tire swing hanging from a sturdy beam, a sandbox waiting to be filled, a small climbing wall painted a bright robin's egg blue. He turned at the sound of feet to wave at Mara, then dashed toward the twins who giggled when he tugged on their blankets. Owen's gaze drifted to the barn itself. Sunlight glittered on the skylights they'd installed, pouring into the main hall where a communal table stood, crafted from reclaimed barnwood. Chairs were neatly tucked beneath it, each engraved with a name, families who would soon gather here, sharing meals, stories, and hope. Beyond the barn, the lake lay still and clear, no longer a trap of death, but a mirror reflecting new life. Reeds poked through the thawing ice edge, frogs croaked their staccato tune, and waterfowl dipped their beaks in the shallows. Mara slipped her hand into Owen's. "We really did it," she said softly, voice full of wonder. He nodded, eyes warm. From ice and fear to this. He gestured at the bustle of volunteers, arriving teachers lugging boxes of art supplies, a young couple carrying potted flowers to line the picnic tables, the local pastor bearing hymnals for Sunday gatherings. Each face bore an expression of anticipation and pride, as though they too had helped carve the haven from winter's heart. Owen took a slow breath, savoring the scent of earth and pine and freshly painted walls. "Remember when we thought it was just a barn worth saving?" Mara laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "I thought it was just a place to hide. Now it's a place to heal." She looked down at the twins who were balancing on the promise post base, reading the vows aloud in unison. "I promise to choose love over fear," Willa declared in a solemn voice. Rosie nodded and added, "I promise to keep the light on." Leo called out, "You have to promise too." He held a scrap of waterproof paper and a marker. "Dad, your turn." Owen knelt, took the paper from Leo, and wrote with careful strokes, "I promise to run into the storm, not away from it." He tied his vow to the post above Mara's, above the children's. The vows fluttered in the breeze like heralds of a new beginning. Across the way, Joe, the project manager, in his well-worn cowboy hat, blew a whistle. All right, folks, ribbon cutting in 5. Volunteers lined up, clapping, smiling, eager for the ceremony. Mara straightened Leo's jacket and smoothed back her hair. She glanced at Owen. Ready? He squeezed her hand. Ready. They walked together to the barn's main doors. The gathering crowd fell silent, anticipation humming in the crisp air. Leo stood at their side, twins perched on Mara's hips, toes dangling. A bright ribbon stretched across the threshold, tied to 2 stakes embedded in the thawed earth. The pastor stepped forward, offering a quiet blessing that spoke of renewal, community, and the power of kindness. Then Mara and Owen each took a pair of scissors and together snipped the ribbon. It fluttered free, tumbling to the ground like a promise fulfilled. Cheers rang out. Mara caught Owen's eye, and they shared a smile so full of gratitude it could have warmed every soul present. Leo leapt forward to dash inside, crying, "Race you to the sandbox!" Rosie and Willa hopped down to follow, laughter trailing behind them like a banner of hope. Inside the barn, sunlight shone through the skylights onto the round table. Mara and Owen moved to the center, arms around each other. "Welcome home," Owen said, his voice carrying both pride and humility. Families streamed through the doors, a mother with a young son clutching a broken toy, a pair of sisters who had found refuge at a shelter and now sought a quiet place to rebuild. Each swipe of the door held a story of hardship, a heart in need of shelter, and each arrival was met with a smile, a handshake, and a place at the table. Neighbors guided guests to warm mugs of cider and the long row of name tags etched in Wood McAllister, Tron Garcia, Muhammad. Each name represented a family now connected by shared experience. The twins ran ahead to the art corner where an easel waited with paints and canvases. Willa dipped a brush in bright yellow. Rosie added strokes of lavender, and soon their canvases told stories of ice broken and light found. Leo joined them, adding flames of orange to represent the porch light that had guided them home. Outside picnic tables held bowls of chili stacks of cornbread and platters of fresh fruit from the community garden. Volunteers served plates with ease, laughter rising above the hum of conversation. Mara and Owen moved through the crowd, handing out bowls, shaking hands, offering hugs. Each embrace felt like the closing of a circle, from the frozen lake's nightmare to this spring day's renewal. By afternoon, the sanctuary's first session began. A mother taught her children coping games in the children's room, while a volunteer counselor hosted a circle for parents to share stories over coffee. Mara sat in on both, absorbing each word, feeling the balm of empathy and shared strength. Owen dropped into a corner to play the harmonica once more. A quiet tune rose above the chatter, a testament to the promise his father's instrument had carried across the ice and into the future. As winter's white gave way to spring's green sparkle in the pines, the haven became more than a place. It became a heartbeat that quickened for every child who felt safe, every parent who felt heard, every volunteer who found a purpose in kindness. When the day's events wound down, Mara, Owen, Leo, Rosie, and Willa stood on the porch steps once more, their silhouettes framed by the lingering glow of the barn's lanterns. They faced the promise post and the porch light, both beacons in the darkness, now symbols of resilience and community. The snow around them had melted into slushy puddles, but the memories of frost remained, the frozen lake that nearly stole them, and the courageous leap that saved them. Mara reached for Owen's hand, and Leo slid between them, twins clinging to each of their arms. "We did it," Mara whispered. "We built something real." Owen nodded, gazing at the light pulsing above them. "We did. And it will keep burning as long as we choose to keep it on." Rosie raised her hand and flipped the porch light switch off and back on again, the bulb flickering then steadying in its glow. "Promise we'll never turn it off," she declared. "We promise," they all replied in unison. 5 hearts in tune. The wind rustled the trees beyond, carrying the promise of new growth, new stories, and new courage. The lake, now thawed, reflected the barn's lights like a mirror of hope. In that reflection, they saw themselves a single dad, a desperate mother, 3 children, and a community knitted together by the power of compassion and second chances. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in gold and blush, they lingered on the porch, hand in hand, proof that even the darkest winter with its ice and fear could give way to the light that leads home. They stood in that light, ready for whatever came next, undaunted, unbroken, and forever guided by the simple truth that kindness kindles miracles, where once there was only ice.